So my name is Glenda Marsh, and I'm the program manager for the Data Mine Lands program, and the data gap study that you're doing is for a program. This is real life stuff, and then Samantha Birdsong, who was here last week, who gave you the rundown on that. She's one of my staff, and John Mashinko, who helped set up the Empower Mine tour on Saturday. He's one of the new staff we have. And so there's just some connecting points. And one of the challenges that we have in the realm of cleaning up legacy old mines in any Western state is precisely why we're having you help us with the data gap study. And that's because there are bunches of agencies that all have some kind of role in cleaning up these old abandoned industrial sites. They're essentially old industrial sites. And so they have some data over here and up there and down here, and we're the state's AML program, and we're being asked to help prioritize things and pull it all and put it all in one place and allow the state to have a clear view of how it's managing these old sites, who's doing what's been done. And because you know, the analogy I like to use is, you know, if a bridge falls down, like a few years ago in Minneapolis, you call up the state highway department and you go, Caltrans, could you please send a bunch of engineers to run around and examine all your bridges and tell us what's going on? And Caltrans says, no problem, we have a list of all the bridges in the state right here. But when you talk about these old abandoned mines, there is no one-stop shop. But we need to move, we're moving that way. A lot of Western states are trying to move that way because you know, we have just gobs, you know, tens of thousands of these old mines. Some are hazardous, some are not. But we have to, you know, work through all that. And in California, we have people, urban areas growing out towards the desert, the foothills and mountains. And so these abandoned mine sites are ending up right in people's backyards and their communities. And you know, little did they know, somebody thought they'd buy, you know, 6 parcels and they got it for a really good deal. And then they want to turn around and develop it, and then they're told, sorry, you have arsenic mill tailings on the property and you can't develop it until you clean it up, and it's going to cost you $1 million, and the person is like, or the company that has the property is like, So this kind of stuff happens all the time, so we try to manage this legacy of mining in the state and the impact and what has been left over from it when we need to use land, and we need to also protect the environment and human health from what's left over. So there you have it. These are just some pictures. I'm just going to focus here on the pictures. This is a back cupola over a vertical shaft in the desert, and so instead of filling that in or putting something flat over the top, there was a term that bats use that shaft, and so they put a cupola over it to keep people and vehicles out and allow bats to fly in and out. Same thing here with this adit going into the hillside. This is a bat culvert gate. So this gate is welded onto the end of a corrugated metal culvert that slides into the adit and allows wildlife and bats to continue to access that now habitat. And this is a vegetation test plot area that Dave Brown and his crew of colleagues here and students are working on at 100-acre mill tailings up in Plumas County. So we're trying to figure out and help the Forest Service figure out what can grow there, how could we grow vegetation there to keep the silica-laden dust from blowing all over the place, so that when you're out there camping and walking around, you're already exposed to that. And then, of course, you can imagine what happened here. Literally, some people are out recreating in their trucks and four-wheel drives in the desert, and this is not the first time this has happened. And they're driving along, you know, and you don't know it's there. So, so this happens all the time. You know, not just vehicles, but people, animals, pets, dogs, dead bodies. Honest to God, this it makes for a really oddball, unique problem. So we have have a data set called TOMS, topographically occurring mine symbols. Have you ever looked at a USGS topo map and you see they have all those little symbols for, you know, all kinds of stuff? And you might see the little mine shaft symbol or the pick and the axe symbol. So those are TOMS symbols that indicate some kind of mining activity. And back in the early 2000s, the staff in my program hand digitized every cotton pick and topo map for the whole state and digitized all of those symbols that were mine related. We call that the TOMS data set. And so this represents the TOMS data set, and you can for mines, and you can see that 67% of legacy abandoned mines in this state are on federal land, BLM, Park Service, Department of Defense, and Forest Service. And a third are on private land, and a very slim sliver is on state-owned or local agency-owned lands, like city or county-owned land. An example of a county-owned landscape with mines on it is Calico Regional Park down in San Bernardino County. It's owned Calico Ghost Town. Just gobs and gobs of shafts and atoms on it. Cool, Ghost Town. So that's owned by San Bernardino County, so that's a local agency-owned abandoned mine land area. And then we estimated through a study done in the year 2000, which you can find on our program website, that about 84% of the hazards are going to be physical safety, and only about 11% are going to really constitute an environmental or contamination situation. But not all safety hazards are dangerous, right? You know, there's little prospects the size of that desk. It's maybe would have affected the desert tortoise. Then kind of get back out. It's probably not going to harm a human. But then you have really deep shafts and adits, and you have all other kinds of hazards. So those are our estimates, kind of based on sampling of information at hand. Nobody has been to all of these dots yet, and we don't have to go to all of them until they become more accessible to people. So, we would prioritize ones that are in certain kinds of watersheds that have identified impacted watershed values like water quality impacts. That might be mine related. But you can kind of see an interesting pattern here. You can see the red dots are all on federal lands. This is all BLM in the desert. And all Forest Service up here, Forest Service here, and Forest Service up there, and kind of a mix of BLM kind of up here on the coast north of San Francisco. And then you can see this band of private. It's all the 49er gold mine stuff going up the Sierra foothills, and then all that's mostly gold up in the north part of the state. A lot of gold, there's a lot of old gold mines down in the desert as well. And there's lots of other types of mines as well, but gold was, pretty big activity. But right now, but this blue band of dots on private land at the foothill zone is where all these foothill communities are, like Nevada City, Grass Valley, Jackson, and all these communities are impacted by these old mines that are like right smack dab in the middle of their community. And there are people who want to develop a parcel, they buy stuff and they go, oops, they're from the Bay Area, and they get some really good deal on a parcel, and then they go, oh no. And so this kind of thing is going on all the time. Here's a map showing the density of TOMS symbols. Again, these USGS topo map symbols. You can see the highest percent of TOMS are found in San Bernardino County. One of these. Those counties. Anyway, and so you can see the desert counties have the highest percentage, and then we have the motherlode up here. All these counties that encompass the motherlode counties. And then we have done quite a bit of inventory under contract to federal agencies. So we've done quite a bit of inventory down here in San Bernardino County, Inyo County. And the BLM hires us to do that. They get a lot of people hiking and driving and camping out there, recreating, driving all over the place, and so there's a lot of encroachment of urban areas into what were once more remote desert areas. There's a lot of contact that people have now with mines. Our program uses state money, and then we contract with federal agencies, and so we only do activities on publicly owned land. And there are other agencies, we'll mention them a little bit later, that pursue highly polluting sites on private land. If you are a private landowner and you have a dangerous shaft or adit on your property, that's your problem. You are liable, right? And but of course, if somebody trespasses on your property and they fall and they get hurt, well, then those parties will have to figure out, you know, whose insurance does what and all that kind of stuff. But we don't get involved in that kind of thing. So most abandoned mines in the state on public land or on BLM, then followed by the Forest Service and then the National Park Service. And other federal would include things like the Department of Defense and Fish and Wildlife Service on refuges, things like that. And you can see that there's then following that is that third, you know, amount that's on private land. The green bar represents the percentage of all of those toms that our program has actually gone to see and inventory since around the year 2002, I think, when we started doing field inventories. And so you can see, well, I just said, well, we don't do anything on private land, but we've done some inventory. But earlier on, we used to take phone calls from the public, mostly in the motherlode counties. People call up and say, oh, this thing appeared in my backyard, our dog found it, a sinkhole, something's going on, you know. And we would go up there and take a look and say, yep, got a hole in the ground, and help them figure out, you know, who to contact to do it, you know, make things safe on their property again. We don't do that anymore because we just are too busy to provide that kind of service, but we do let them know what kind of services they should call to get assistance to make their properties safe. The National Park Service contracted with us to inventory all of the abandoned mines on their properties a few years ago, so they're pretty much at 100% coverage. And then we're chipping away at BLM and the Forest Service. Bottom line with them is it's going to cost a lot of money, and the federal government through Congress has not really funded those agencies to a high enough level to really knock that out for them. So that's just a work in progress. What kinds of things, as you know, as you learned on your tour at Empire Mine State Park and at Champion Mill, that location, there are problems. There are a variety of problems that come from abandoned mines. There can be contaminants there going into the air, into the water, people coming into direct contact with mercury is a very unique legacy pollution throughout our state. And you'll learn more about that when you go to Malakoff Diggins. And then there's also physical safety hazards, you know, for wildlife and people. When they fall into things, go exploring, fall down broken structures, fall into holes and whatnot. And people have died in old abandoned mines. They've been injured and required very expensive rescues from the local county sheriff, who's always in charge of rescues. And so that can be really expensive. Let's see here. So, since there are so many old mines out there with potentially, you know, different kinds of hazards associated with them, and we only have a little bit of money. Everybody has a little bit of money in the abandoned mine world. The federal, the state, the locals will have a little bit to go around. And just like if you have too much homework one night, you have to prioritize, right? You have to think about, which test do I have tomorrow? Okay, that's the one I'm going to be ready for. The rest of it I'll put off. And so we do the same thing. We have to figure out a system for prioritizing where to go to inventory, find out what's there, and so forth. And so we when we're, the reasons why, and there are lots of reasons, I mean, just, you know, you have to decide where to go, where to spend money, how to spend our time, do the most important things first. But transparency is also really, really important when you're working on any kind of natural resource type of problem or any kind of I don't know, hazard abatement issue, because somebody out there wants to know, how come you did work on this site and that community and that you know, legislative or congressional district, but not over here? How did you decide to spend resources that way? How are you deciding to spend resources? How do I know, as an elected official or the agency secretary, how do I know you guys are making wise choices about where to go work? All these agencies working. And so being able to tell people how you came to decisions for how you've prioritized things and why you're working here and not there is about transparency. And it's very, very important in our system of governance and with the public, letting the public know what we're doing and why. So that's another reason why we want to create a scheme for prioritizing things that people can look at and understand. So that pretty much tells you that there. Right now, so as I mentioned, there are just a gob of different agencies. I'll show you another slide of that to show us their roles more clearly. But there are a lot of different agencies who have specific roles in dealing with these abandoned mine sites. And so our job at the Abandoned Mine Lands Program, we are the state of California's Abandoned Mine Lands Program. Just about every state has an Abandoned Mine Lands Program. But we don't own the land. We don't even have a regulatory authority. We can't sue anybody, issue somebody a water quality violation, you know, at Empire Mine, you know, they had a water quality violation going on. They had some expectations from the regional water board about their drainage, and so they had to do something. And we don't even do that, you know. But we play a role in helping to promote collaboration with all these different agencies that have jurisdiction and have authority to make things happen. And we have a little bit of money that we can kind of partner with them on to make something happen. And so one of the things that we're doing with the California Abandoned Mine Land Agency group, this is the interagency group with everybody, is we're creating a tool called the California Abandoned Mine Prioritization Tool, CAMP-T. And that is going to be our tool that's going to allow us to look at the data that you're going to gather in the data gap study. You're making the records or completing the records that we need so that we can throw the tool on top and say rank all these mines against each other. Tell us which ones have worse hazards than another based on the information in these records. So as Samantha, when she was here last week, she told you about CAMP-T. That's where we are. So CAMP-T is an effort led by the Department of Conservation and my program on behalf of the state's interest in being organized and transparent and efficient with the use of funds and helping promote collaboration of all these different organizations that are involved. So I'm going to just take a pause. Does anybody have any questions or ahas at this moment? Is this making sense? Okay. Right. One day, you might be lucky and work for a government agency.
I do have a question.
Sure.
So with the amount of abandoned mines that there are, is there a strong need for like private mine remediation consulting? And are there private firms that are out there doing this too?
Yeah, and that's a really good question because you'll notice there's nobody private in this circle here. And that's a really, really good question. So when a private landowner is found, or a private entity is found, because we're talking about legacy mines, you know, and some of the ownership goes way back and it's gone and it's been bought here. It's a very, lengthy investigation. But when an owner is found, or a party that can be made liable, potentially responsible party, they call it PRP, whether it's the federal government or it's some long-gone private entity that's now morphed into something else, like Arco, oil company or something. And the money they pay for cleanup, typically what they do is they hire a consulting firm, a technical consulting firm, to do all the work.
Okay.
So they usually will be in contracted that way to do the work.
And it could only be for abandoned mines on private lands.
Could be either. You know, the Forest Service has abandoned mines and they're the responsible party. They got stuck holding the bag. Or the BLM or something like that. You know, they're like, it's your baby now, and so they have to pay the money. And they usually hire contractors.
Private consulting companies would only work on private lands.
No, they could work on stuff that's publicly held.
Okay.
But they would be paid, they would be hired through contract by the public agency. Or the private party would hire it under the direction of, what outcomes are required, and they would hire one to work on a private site.
So do you think having more private consulting companies would be beneficial in terms of California?
It seems like there's enough.
Okay.
There's large ones, there's small ones, some of them have very particular niches, certain type of function they provide in the whole scheme of cleanup. But there are definitely firms out there that they work nationally. They work in California, outside of California, some just work in California. I haven't heard that there's not been, there's been a shortage, but there are lots of firms.
Talking about a specific example, we were out at Empire Mine last week and they created their passive wastewater treatment facility. Was that created by a private consulting company or was that?
Thank you for bringing that up. Empire Mine is a perfect example of this. So the state government did a search for a potentially liable party that they could tag financially, and they found Newmont Mining Corporation, because at one point they were operating there. And they're still alive and kicking, and they have money and insurance, so so they're on the hook. So they actually, that company has put up a very large multi-million dollar, tens of million dollars, bond or something like that, to finance the operation and maintenance of those ponds, the filtration system, and also to build and implement all the cleanup that they are required to do. So they've paid it, and so they've gone out and hired contractors and come in and do that work.
Do any of the government agencies actually perform any of the remediation work, or are they just ones who decide that remediation work needs to be performed?
Sometimes they do, it kind of depends. It just depends what their staffing setup is. But a lot of times, when it comes down to the construction implementation, they might do some investigative stuff themselves. But when it comes down to really the design construction, typically they'll be contracted. These are really good questions. Because our prioritization tool has to deal with both types of hazards, chemical hazards and physical safety hazards, we have to think about the criteria that sort of unique to both of those issues. And so this gives you an idea of the general types of criteria that we would think about, and all the agencies think about when they're trying to figure out, should I clean up that one or should I clean up that one? I have $10, where should I focus attention? And so, of course, some contaminants are, more hazardous to human health and the environment than others. So what type of contaminant is there? What is the actual threat? What's the contact with that contaminant? How concentrated is that contaminant? And then what type of processing went on? If a lot of these sites, sometimes they have mills for processing ore and getting the mineral out. So if there was processing that went on the site, that automatically kind of raises a big red flag. That's like probably going to be a little bit more contaminated material. And then are there, what kind of water quality impacts is that site producing? And then what kind of exposure do people and wildlife and fish have to those contaminants? Then with physical safety hazards, we think about a site, how many openings are there? Sometimes you can go down the desert and be in a canyon, and you look down the canyon and it's just like Swiss cheese, literally. Just holes everywhere, at every level, up and down the canyon wall. It's just astounding. And so kind of looking at all the different features there to think about what is the threat to, what would happen if somebody, came upon that and fell in or whatever. and looking at stabilities of slopes and whatnot. You could be standing near something that collapses on you, or you could have something under your foot collapse out from under you. So, and again, what is the ease of access for people to that area to interact with those hazards? So we're in the process with the, as Samantha told you, we're in the process of creating we're creating a decision-making tool. Prioritizing things is a way to make decisions, right? Should I read this or study for that? Or should I, go out for dinner instead and just forget about all that? So we have to think about what are the decision points? Where do we have to make decisions? Well, we have to make a decision. Should I go and look at those mines over there, or should I go look at those over here? Just to go look and see, inventory. What are a couple of things you can think of that might drive that decision? Should I go over and look at inventory those holes in the ground over here, or should I go inventory those holes in the ground over there?
Public access.
Access, public access, yeah. How does the public get around out there? Hike, they could hike there. How close is it to a trailhead? They could drive. How close is it to a road?
But it's horizontal tunnel or vertical?
Yeah, we could look from the information we have, the sort of the desktop information that we have about maybe how many openings there might be on this site versus that site. So exactly, those are the kinds of things that we have to think about, if we're going to inventory somewhere first versus second. And then once we get there, we collect some information, what's there. Is there weird discolored tailings piles and there's evidence of an old mill. Kind of creepy, potential chemical hazard, then there's holes, at horizontal and shafts going down, there's all kinds of stuff going on, old buildings crumbling and towering over you. So then we have to make another decision point. I gotta spend money to go for chemical hazards. I'm gonna spend money to go and sample the discolored tailings, see if there's contamination there, right? And so then I have another decision point. I got that data. Nothing really going on here. It's just iron. It's somebody spilled their popsicle on it. I don't know. And it turned it pink. Here we found some contamination. Okay, I'm going to put those over in this pile. And I'm going to collect some more data. How bad is that contamination? And then I have another decision point. I have a whole bunch of them. I went to see how bad the contamination was. And some of these are really bad, so I'm going to have to do what they call a full site investigation. So there's these different decision points for dealing with hazardous waste sites. I mean, now you're talking just standard hazardous waste cleanup stuff. With the physical safety hazards, we can pretty much just right there, we're there, 100 feet, dropped a rock down, never heard it touch bottom. That can rank really high. We're going to recommend to BLM and Forest Service that one needs to get closed. So we're done, and we give them that information. So we don't really have to do any other investigation there. So simpler that way. So this process of remediation requires a lot of information gathering, particularly if there's some kind of contamination issuing from the mine. The contamination could come from the water draining out, like you saw in Empire Mine. It also could be contaminated tailings, and there's people walking around now. You saw examples of that that got tapped at Empire. And so, there's lots of different ways that you can get exposed to the contamination, either the fish and wildlife or people. And once that information is gathered and we know something has to be done, we have to figure out priorities. We have to figure out where's the money going to come from. We have to figure out who has the authority to make something happen there and make somebody clean it up. And so you'll find, and if we're going to go for grants, or if there's sort of multiple jurisdictions, they have to figure out who those partners are and who's, kind of what their roles are. And then once you create a project. Okay, we have some money, we know what the problem is, we know who's involved, and now we're going to go through the steps of cleaning up the site, fixing it, and then you hopefully pop out the other end with a remediated reclaimed site. And the whole goal is to eliminate or mitigate to, as far as you can the hazard from that site so that it's no longer harmful to the environment or to people. This slide here kind of gives you an idea of the steps for remediation. When you're making decisions. So we have to make a decision to go do an inventory and collect preliminary information about the site and all the features that are there. And everybody here understands features, right? Holes, structures, tailings piles, rock piles, anything that's a feature of that mine site. And so when we are dealing with, so we're collecting some data, we have to make some decisions on that first level of data. And if there's an environmental hazard, potential contamination, there are these federal and state cleanup programs, and they have to go through these very specific steps. Up here, somewhere over here, you're collecting some data, as I said before, you make a decision, is there something really bad here? Do we have to do anything about it? If there is, then it's going to go through these kinds of steps here. And if you don't have to do anything about it, then, you're done. And then, if it's physical safety hazards, as I mentioned, you don't have to go too far. You can figure everything out you need, and then you share your information with the public land agency, and either we will help them or they will pay us to build closures for those holes. So if you work for EPA or the Department of Toxic Substance Control, or the water boards, or the Bureau of Land Management, or the Forest Service, you will end up working on these types of steps, which include studies and planning and writing documents and ultimately getting a contract with probably a private consulting firm that's going to do the cleanup and probably going to help you out with O&M if you have to keep doing some maintenance, like you saw at Empire. They have to keep the water filtration system there going. So they have been doing that. They'll have to do that for as long as the mine drains water. So, any questions? Let's take a moment here just to kind of let people ask questions.
Everybody know what O&M stands for?
Operation.
Okay.
Operations and maintenance. Yeah.
Very common term.
And that's a good point to sort of talk about a little bit, because O&M is a really big challenge in the world of hazardous waste cleanup and then mine cleanup. Do people remember the Gold King mine incident from this past August? The mine in Colorado that released all this water, turned the river Young's River orange. So, or maybe you've already heard talk about Iron Mountain Mine up in Shasta area, and of course you went to Empire Mine. Who's paying for the O&M? Forever. Forever, really, it seems like forever, because it could be thousands of years, right? So, and one day, think about it. It's like we deal with salmonid habitat in the state of California, all over the West. If it weren't for human intervention, there would be no salmonid habitat. Every year they dump gravel in the stream. They control the flow of cold water. They have a center in Sacramento. If you go in there, it looks like a NASA jet propulsion lab or something. They've got computer screens, every reservoir in the system, federal and state. It's a combined operations center. Open up the valve, close the gate, water flowing, not flowing. Oh, we need water over here. We need water for the salmon down there. Okay, If it weren't for all of that, there would be zero. So this is kind of human intervention again that we're talking about here, O&M, to keep these hazards at bay from certain kinds of mine sites. Sometimes you just cap it, you remove it, you stick it in a hole, whatever, you're okay. But the water treatment stuff can be really a big commitment, and so it's very expensive. Last slide here, and then we'll go to a couple other things. This is, our program receives money from fees on gold and silver production.